Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and start this video by explaining. This is a Cabela's 1:6 LPVO. They call it their AR, and it's just a basic 1:6 LPVO. I was in dire need of some form of defensive optic for my rifle. I also coyote hunt with this gun. I varmint hunt with this gun. I use these rifles for everything. But what I had was a tactical shortcoming that needed to be addressed, and I needed a cheap optic. I prefer second focal plane optics because when I dial back my zoom, I still like to have a visible reticle, and you can get a finer reticle oftentimes with a second focal plane because it doesn't need to be heavy enough to be visible at 1 power. I only need the reticle to be spot on at maximum magnification anyways. Like, I don't really run these for their intended use anywhere in between. I'm either at 1 power or I'm at 6 power. And I operate pretty much all my scopes like that. If they could just make a shorter throw that gets that same zoom in that erector assembly, that would be great, but nobody really does that. I think a lot of people use what's in between, but I either use 1 or use 6. On my other scope, I either use 3 or I use 9. The reticle's dialed for 9, but at 3, the crosshair is still nice and visible. So I have made a change that I own 2 first focal plane scopes, and maybe that's useful in a 5 to 25 power scope, or in a 3 to 15 like what's on my 308, my long range rifle. But for most of my uses, I only need second focal plane. So this is the 6mm UPC upper, and this is the scope that I bought for it, and this is not the scope that's going to make a home on this rifle, but I needed a target scope with reliable turrets, and preferably, at least 15 to 20 power of magnification. This one happens to be a 20, so it's a 5 to 20, not a 5 to 25. So that way I can see my bullet holes downrange when I was doing load development for this thing, which I still am. The issue I have is that this scope does not have enough parallax adjustment for the close-in range. So, like, if I'm carrying this rifle and I see a grouse or a coyote anywhere closer than 100, the parallax is so far, and there isn't enough for the really close range stuff that I literally had to put a red dot on the top of it. Not a huge fan of the setup. It's heavy. This scope isn't a permanent home here, but it is an optic, and it's better than none for the time being. But that brings me back to the LPVO. I needed something that isn't this for my 223 5.56, what is considered to be my reliable defensive weapon. I needed it on a budget, and I needed it to work, and I needed it to have some sort of a metered reticle. This is some sort of a ballistic drop coefficient, and we're gonna break it down because this is a review of this LPVO. To be perfectly honest, my gripes with this LPVO are very, very small. However, I do have gripes. I do not put a 100-yard battle zero on any rifle that I intend to shoot under 100 yards, because I like to pop the heads off a grouse. If I needed to shoot the buttons off of a Russian soldier's uniform, then I want to be able to shoot the buttons off of it. That being said, at 100 yards, that's fine. 100 yard zero. But you bring that into 50 or 25 and a little more guesswork happens. So I like a 50 yard zero. This reticle, they say, is set up for this with a 223 or a 308, which is pretty vague. My other issue is, in the manual, they do not tell you what the calibrated measurements are for each of the marks. They tell you some windage measurements, but they do not tell me anything about the actual reticle as it sits. The bottom line is, what I came to find out is, even if I zeroed this thing at 100 yards, this reticle would not be suitable for anything, really. Maybe 55 grain full metal jacket ball ammunition, but I don't shoot that, do I? Does anyone shoot that anymore? Is that anyone's like preferred ammo anymore? If it is, like, let me know in the comments, because I shoot at least 75 grain, 73 grain, 77 grain hollow point boat tails or polymer tipped ammunition for pretty much everything concerning the defense of my life. And I occasionally venture into really light stuff like 50 grain and 53 grain soft point and polymer tipped ammunition for varmints when I can't afford a pass through. But for everything else, there's heavy bullets, and so that's my issue. So I ran this test, and this test told me a lot. What I did here was I went ahead and drew my 0x, which is where my aim point for everything, and then I took a framing square and I just drew that line up. And I want to add also, like, it looked to me like perhaps my scope was canted a little bit, crooked, and I don't think that's possible, because I leveled the gun and then shined a light through this scope, and then the reticle I lined up with gravity to a plumb bob. Shout out to my best buddy Jesse for teaching me that trick, but gravity doesn't lie to you. So that's why I shot this final verification shot at the end, and what we've gotten is that it's actually just the bore got hot, and so we have a hot bore shift that goes up quartered to the right, and that's good to know, because my final shot was at 100. I actually dropped some and shifted to the right some, which happens. The barrel gets warmer, the harmonics change as it's whipping, and the bullet exits at a different point during that whip as the barrel warms up. So that's why I shot this final group here, was to see if my scope is out of plumb or if I was getting a hot bore shift, which it turns out it's a hot bore shift. I shot this test at 100 yards. We've already established that I've got a 50 yard / 200 yard zero, which I have confirmed this thing is absolutely nuts on at 200, and it is absolutely nuts on at 50. So I started this test. I shot a 3-shot group at 100, which is right in here, which, this is a little bit off. Right in the wheelhouse, right around 1.5, 1.75 minutes, high of 0 at 200, or at 100, which puts me dead on at 200. Okay, so that being in mind, we've measured the difference in 0. We're shooting at 100 yards. Then I'm going to recalibrate this tape to right on for 100 yards. Another thing to note is that I shot this test consecutively. So this is 33 rounds. This is the final 3. But I shot this 33 rounds end to end to end to end. I threw a loaded magazine in. I shot 3-round groups at every reticle marking from bottom to top, and at every one of those hash marks I was aiming at the same exact point. So as you can see, the first hash mark gave us about 2 inches, second hash mark about 3.5, third hash mark 6, and so on and so forth. I'll give you a look at all the groups. That's actually a 3-shot group, but you know, chance and luck Just so happens it was a really tight group. And that is the very bottom hash mark. So basically what we have is that the center dot is 0. The top of the first line is 2 MOA. The bottom of the first line is 3.5. 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 17, and 20 MOA. Now, this is not exactly a ballistic drop coefficient. It is just a series of randomly chosen, willy-nilly minute markings that kind of work. It's a very busy reticle to look through. I will turn on the light in this scope and we'll look through the reticle and you can see how actually busy it is to look through. Like, there's a lot going on here. And at 6 power, this reticle covers up a lot of stuff. So I would prefer to have a little fewer hash marks. I don't exactly need a reticle that goes to 690 or 725 yards. Now, these are depending on which ammo I use. So I've made one for my 73 grain ELDM hand loads, which equates to about 725 yards at the bottom hash mark and 6.7 minutes of windage, which is interesting because there are no windage marks in this reticle, but from the center to the edge of the horseshoe is 6 minutes, and from the center to the outside of the horseshoe, which there's no marks on the reticle for, is 9 minutes. And so from outside to outside is 18, and from inside of the hook to inside of the hook is 12. And then these wider bars are 3 minutes of angle wide, and these skinnier bars are 1.5 minutes of angle wide. So I've made these cheat cards because I think that kind of thing is important. I've laminated them with some packaging tape, and this is going to go with me in my go bag every place I go, because you just never know when you might need something like this. So I recommend to everybody take their reticles and actually put them to the test and see what your rifle does with them. And what else I'm going to do is I'm going to take this gun out at range and I'm going to verify this card and mark down any changes with a grease pen, and I'm going to remake this whole card if I have to. And I might remake this card anyway. It's kind of difficult to read. It doesn't make the best sense. I drew the reticle to scale off of the user's manual. It's just all kind of a pain and difficult to read. I need to just draw a blown up version of it, but it's better than nothing, and I've got her started. I just wanted to share with you guys what this reticle is and how you can get to the bottom of this. It's pretty silly, but what it amounts to is that with my 73 grain ELDMs, and you can round up here because you figure most of the targets that you're going to be shooting at, even at, let's say, 600 yards, which I think is about the maximum effective range of this rifle. I mean, if I shot a coyote at 725, I think he's going to crawl off and die somewhere. But my supersonic capability ends at about 600 yards. And so if I want to shoot a coyote and have him pile up and roll, 600 yards is absolutely the maximum range. But if you're in a situation where you have the People's Liberation Army shooting at you and you just need to put some holes in something and he can crawl off and go seek medical attention somewhere, but you just need to get maximum amount of bodies out of the fight, hey, 725 yards, if you can hit the dude, it's going to do something. If you poke a hole, it's going to do something. So having just a list of the equivalent ranges that this equates to is pretty useful. Pretty useful. The reticle's busy. At 1 power, you get a little bit of fisheye. Everybody talks about how it'll make you seasick. I don't get seasick. I just leave both eyes open when I look through the thing. and it works just fine. And when I dial it up to 6, the reticle's on. That's when the markings actually match, and everything just works just fine. So for the price point, $200 for a scope that that works, and that the reticle actually has some sort of sense to it, although I wish it would say that in the book. It works. It works. Is it ideal? No. I think Primary Arms pretty much has the BDC reticle game like in the bag. Like, and especially seeing as I can send Primary Arms my dope, and they will literally build me a reticle that perfectly matches my dope. Like, you can't beat that. It doesn't get better than that. But I'm not on that kind of a budget. I'm poor. If you didn't notice, I can't even afford a flat dark earth rifle. So I spray painted it. It is what it is. So I'm going to give you guys a look through the reticle. We'll look through it on 1 power, and then we will look through it on 6 power. And I'll give you guys a look at what it looks like. All right, we've got an empty cleared rifle. I'll turn this on to the lowest setting, which I like, as it goes to the lowest setting first. And that is the reticle. This is on 1 power. As you can see, on 1 power, the reticle really isn't too bad. I mean, you just put the circle on something and it's gonna be what it is. But I'm gonna go ahead and up the power to 6. All right, so we got this thing kinda sorta on the tire of my pickup. Hopefully I don't make you seasick here. But as you can see, the reticle, now through your naked eye, you can see a little bit more detail. Like, everybody knows you look through a camera and you kind of lose, I don't know, it seems like about half, almost like looking in a mirror. You lose about half of the detail. So like, people are like, oh, look how far away this is. And it's like 500 yards. But if you look out 500 yards with your naked eye, you can absolutely see it. But once you get it on film, it looks like just an incredible distance. So I'm going to zoom this in. We'll hit about 2 times. Perhaps I can make it work. Okay, so there you go. You can kind of see a little more of the reticle. Those hash marks are really close together. And overall, the system's just kind of silly. But it's better than nothing. So for a review, if I had to give it an out of 10 rating. For an out of 10 rating, first off, the thing came with this mount, which isn't a perfect mount, but boy howdy. That's, I don't know, what did I pay for my Burris, my PEPRs? 150, 200 bucks a piece. So it came with a mount, and the mount is snug and tight. One of my gripes, the thing said Cabela's all over the darn thing in really reflective writing. It said AR on here. It just kind of silly. So, but if you're gonna paint stuff, like, eventually the paint will wear off and this stuff will shine. But a guy can take even just a little bit of JB Weld and just JB Weld a gray patch over that and then paint over it again, and you can make silly writing disappear on equipment. So for $199, you gotta understand here, price point. The scope cover didn't come with it. I can't find a scope cover that's 33 millimeters. I don't know if it's that imperative, so I might not. But this scope cover, $8, $10, whatever that is. So for $199 scope that has an illuminated reticle, that has the option of red or green, that starts on 1 power and goes up. Granted, the 1 power is a little bit on the bright side, like too bright. We're not going to split hairs here. For $199, I give this thing probably an 8 or 9 out of 10. There are a few options available around the same price point that the reticle isn't quite as busy, but those ones also, the reticle is not quite as useful. So it's a trade-off. And the bottom line is you cannot expect a $199 piece of equipment to perform even as well as a $300 piece of equipment, i.e. like a SIG Tango or whatever those LPVOs are. I looked through a handful of them, of different LPVOs while I was at that store, and I literally ended up settling on the cheapest one that they had because all of them were a compromise. None of them made me happy. Some of the reticles ranged from just as bad as this to worse than this to slightly better than this. But I am not trading a slightly better reticle for $150. Now, I would trade a perfect reticle for $1,000. I would pay $1,200 for an LPVO with less fisheye that's maybe 1 to 8 or 1 to 6 that has the exact reticle that I want and in second focal plane. I'd pay even more if the second focal plane had a set of calibrated measurements for maximum power and minimum power. Like it would tell me this first hash mark is 20 feet or 15 feet or 15 MOA at minimum power. That would be cool. Another gripe is that it is a long ways from 1 to 6. You really got to crank on this thing. So a handle would be good, so I can crank it over. And a little bit shorter throw for maximum would be good. I'm probably never going to put this thing on 3 power and say, oh yeah, that'll be just what I needed. I'm either going to run it on 1 or I'm going to run it on 6. The thing rides around on 1, and if something's far enough away that I need to dial it up, I'm going to dial it up. So that's my review. It's the Cabela's AR 1 to 6 LPVO. It's a compromise. All LPVOs are a compromise. I recognize that. This is just a very cheap compromise. And, you know, I've yet to see how tough it is. I've, you know, put 50 rounds through the rifle since I got this LPVO. My rifles live with me. Everywhere I go, it rides in the truck. Everything I do, this rifle lives with me. It comes to bed with me. And that might sound silly. Good habits die hard the same as bad habits and old habits. So build good habits and start building good habits today. That's about enough of that. We'll see how tough this thing is. If it breaks, I'll let you guys know. So, thanks for coming out.